Teacher Elias Woods brought an orphan, Thomas, to school, but within a week, he himself was accused of child trafficking and vanished without a trace. Behind this monstrous conspiracy were Mrs. Grimshaw, Sheriff Brody, and the mysterious Mr. Blackwood, who sold innocent orphans into forced labor in the mines. However, Elias refused to give up. He escaped prison to uncover the truth and rescue his students. Discover how one teacher challenged an entire system to ensure justice prevailed, and the children found their freedom. Elias Woods, a history teacher at the Bright Path Orphanage, always believed that knowledge was the key to freedom. When he brought a new student into the school, a quiet and withdrawn 10-year-old Thomas, whose eyes were full of unspoken sadness, Elias saw in him not just another orphan, but potential that needed to be unlocked. Thomas had been found on the outskirts of town, emaciated and frightened, and Elias personally took on his education, believing that school would become a sanctuary for the boy. Elias was known for his kindness and selflessness. He often stayed late, helping the children with their lessons, and was more than just a teacher to them. His reputation was impeccable, and no one could suspect him of anything untoward. However, with Thomas's arrival, strange things began to happen at the orphanage. Several children who had recently joined the orphanage began to disappear. First one, then another. The orphanage director, the stern and detached Mrs. Grimshaw, explained this as transfers to other institutions or adoptions, but her explanations seemed vague and unconvincing. Elias began to notice that Mrs. Grimshaw was acting strangely. She often secluded herself with unfamiliar men in her office, and her once modest wardrobe was now filled with expensive jewelry. He also noticed that she showed an unusual interest in Thomas, asking Elias strange questions about his past and health. Elias felt a growing unease. One day, just a week after Thomas started school, Elias received an urgent message from Sheriff Brody, who summoned him to the station. Elias, unsuspecting, went there, confident that it would be about some minor incident. However, upon entering the sheriff's office, he saw something that made his heart clench with shock. On the table were documents accusing him of child trafficking, and next to them, a list of missing orphans, including Thomas. Sheriff Brody, his face rigid and cold, looked at Elias with undisguised condemnation. "Elias Woods," he said, "you are under arrest on charges of child trafficking." Elias didn't even have time to speak. He was seized, handcuffed, and thrown into a cell. He screamed that it was a mistake, that he was innocent, that he would never harm children, but his words were lost in the clang of the closing door. A wave of burning anger, mixed with despair, rose within him. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a vile, monstrous lie that had shattered his life. The cell was cold and damp. Days merged into an endless series of nightmares. Elias couldn't understand how he, a man who had dedicated his life to children, could be accused of such a monstrous crime. He replayed the last few weeks in his mind over and over, trying to find some clue. He recalled the strange disappearances of children, the mysterious visits to Mrs. Grimshaw, her sudden wealth. The pain of the injustice was unbearable, but it only fueled his determination to uncover the truth. Sheriff Brody visited him several times, each time bringing new evidence. Testimonies from witnesses who allegedly saw Elias leading children away, forged documents confirming his involvement in the criminal scheme. Brody reveled in his power, his eyes gleaming with malice. He hinted that Elias was part of a large network that supplied children for illegal labor in remote mines. Elias realized he had been framed, and that someone very powerful was behind it. He felt his life crumbling, his reputation destroyed. However, even in the darkest moments, a flicker of hope glimmered in Elias's soul. He knew he was innocent, and that knowledge gave him strength. One day, during a rare walk in the prison yard, he met old Joseph, a former inmate who was serving time for petty theft. Joseph was known for his ability to gather information. Elias, risking everything, told him his story. Joseph, listening to him, nodded. "Mrs. Grimshaw, you say? And Sheriff Brody? I heard something. Rumor has it Grimshaw has been selling children for a long time. And Brody, he's covering for her. And not just her. There's another man, Mr. Blackwood. He's from the capital. He's the main one. He takes the children and sends them north, to the mines." Joseph's words were a revelation for Elias. Blackwood, he had heard that name before, but hadn't paid attention. Now everything fell into place. It wasn't just Grimshaw and Brody. It was an entire network that used the orphanage as a front for their dirty dealings. Elias's anger flared with renewed force. He had to not only clear his name, but also save the children. He had to expose this entire monstrous scheme. Elias realized that the only way to prove his innocence was to escape and find evidence. With Joseph's help, who knew all the loopholes in the prison, Elias devised an escape plan. At night, when the guard was lax, he managed to get out of his cell. The escape was risky, but despair drove him forward. He ran without looking back, his heart pounding with fear and determination. He hid by day, moving by night, surviving on what he found in the forest. His goal was the north, where, according to Joseph, the mines where the children were sent were located. The journey was long and dangerous, but the thought of Thomas and the other orphans suffering in captivity drove him forward. His pain and anger were his constant companions. He felt his hatred for Blackwood, Grimshaw, and Brody grow with every mile he covered. Weeks later, exhausted but unbroken, Elias reached a remote mining settlement. He infiltrated one of the mines using his knowledge of underground passages. What he saw there horrified him. Children, many no older than Thomas, worked in dark, filthy seams, their faces covered in soot, their eyes dull from exhaustion. They were beaten, poorly fed, and literally enslaved. Elias saw Thomas. He was thin and pale, but a spark of hope still flickered in his eyes. Elias managed to secretly contact Thomas and the other children. He gathered their testimonies, wrote down their names, learned about the brutality of the overseers, and how they were tricked into the orphanage and then sold. He also learned that the mines belonged to a certain magnate Harrison, who was in collusion with Blackwood. Elias realized that he had uncovered not just a crime, but an entire criminal empire. In his soul, hope ignited that he could not only save the children, but also put an end to this horror. Elias returned from the mines with irrefutable evidence, detailed testimonies from the children, sketches of the mines where they worked, and even some documents he managed to steal, confirming Harrison's connection to Blackwood and the orphanage. He understood that he couldn't just return to town. He needed a powerful ally. He turned to Senator Morris, known for his fight against corruption and his advocacy for children's rights. Senator Morris, a man with a firm gaze and an impeccable reputation, was appalled. He was in shock at the scale of the inhumanity. "This is monstrous," he murmured, his voice trembling with rage. He immediately contacted federal agents and initiated a full-scale investigation. The operation was conducted under the cover of night. Federal marshals, led by Senator Morris, suddenly raided Harrison's mines. The magnate and his men were caught off guard. The children were freed. Thomas, seeing Elias, rushed to him, his eyes full of tears of relief. Then the Rangers stormed the Bright Path orphanage. Mrs. Grimshaw was arrested, and her confession led to the arrest of Sheriff Brody, and finally Mr. Blackwood, who was caught in the Capitol as he tried to flee. The trial of Harrison, Blackwood, Grimshaw, and Brody became a sensation. Elias, Thomas, and the other freed children testified. Their words, despite the horrors they had endured, were filled with such pain that they shook the entire court. Irrefutable evidence was presented, including financial manipulations and the connection to the orphanage. The verdict was harsh. Harrison and Blackwood received life sentences for human trafficking, slavery, and cruel treatment. Grimshaw and Brody also received long sentences. The triumph was complete. All the children were freed and placed in new, safe orphanages, where they received care and help to recover. Elias Woods was fully exonerated, his name cleared. He returned to the orphanage, now led by an honest and conscientious person, and continued his work. Thomas, though he had endured terrible things, now found a true friend and mentor in Elias. There was no more sadness in his eyes, only light and hope for the future. The story of Elias, the teacher who defied a powerful criminal empire to save his students, became a legend. It inspired many to fight for justice and protect the innocent, reminding everyone that true courage can shine even in the most desperate circumstances, and that evil, no matter how hidden, will always be exposed.